Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final dissemination event of Gaming Horizons. I am Carlo Perrotta. I am University Academic Fellow in Digital Learning from the University of Leeds, and I will be briefly introducing the project before handing it over to my colleagues who will describe some of the main outputs and results from our projects, which we look forward to sharing with you today. Okay, just a few words about our project and where it comes from. We are an Horizon 2020 project. Horizon 2020 is the flagship research and innovation program funded by the European Commission. We are a sister project, which means that within the context of Horizon 2020, we are something a bit smaller. We are running alongside the main program, and we're looking at one specific area of the Horizon 2020 program from a particular perspective. The area obviously is gaming, gamification, game-based learning, and so on. Our objective as a project is to open up the dialogue about the role of video games in education and society. That's the kind of broad goal that we have as a project. We want to consider the intended and unintended consequences of ethics and social responsibility of the design and usage of video games. And we want to encourage public engagement around this medium. We think that the social and cultural purposes of video games are a topic of interest not just to developers, not just to industry people, but that citizens, people from civil society, should be involved in defining what the priorities are, what the risks are, what the challenges, what lies ahead in terms of the future of this medium. And we want to challenge some more taken for granted narratives about the purposes, the goals of this medium, ideas around seriousness, around leisure, around cultural relevance, and so forth. Again, a few more words about this idea of a sister project, which is quite a peculiar one. A sister project, like I said, it's a smaller project within the broader Horizon 2020 program. These projects are supposed to run alongside the kind of core Horizon 2020 program, taking a very distinct perspective based on social science and humanities. There was this assumption in the sort of Horizon 2020 policy circles that there are people from the social science and the humanities that have interesting things to say about technology. But very often their voices are sidelined, are not heard in these kind of big flagship programs, which tend to emphasize the kind of more technological, economic outcomes. So the sister project was introduced as an opportunity to engage in a more critical, thoughtful, theoretical also kind of examination of technological issues. And the area that this particular project is focusing on is gaming. The ultimate goal, of this sort of exercise is to propose alternative frameworks, alternative framings, different ways of going about research and innovation, different ways of going about using a particular technology, in this case gaming, informed by criteria of responsible research and innovation. And we'll talk a bit more about what these criteria actually mean in this project and more broadly. So I would like to maybe start, before going into the detail of the kind of empirical phase of the project, before introducing the empirical phase of the project, I would like to start with the kind of question, are games just a technology? Of course they are. I mean, they have very strong technological components. There is hardware, there is software, there is computer science and computer engineering and software engineering and so on. And this goes without saying, it's without doubt. At the same time, games are part of the texture of society. They are extremely pervasive. They are everywhere. They are part of the way we communicate and interact, increasingly so. They have incredible expressive possibilities. And whether or not they're a form of art, that is open to discussion. But the expressive possibilities, the kind of things that is possible to convey through video games is remarkable. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. They define our identities, the way we engage with games, the way we play, the way we build our communities, the way we develop, establish links with others around shared interests, around the passions, and very often video games are part of these passions and these interests. They occupy our time increasingly so. The way we spend our time, we choose to spend our free time, is increasingly to do with video games. Video games are more and more involved in that. And they shape our expectations about society. They shape how we expect very often experiences to be. They shape the way we expect, for example, our jobs or our entertainment to be. They structure the way we engage with society and culture. So, of all the innovations actually featured in Horizon 2020, you could actually say that games and gamification is the one with the largest cultural, educational, and economic implications. It's so much more than just a technology. They are played by all sorts of people, and they are used for all sorts of purposes beyond mere entertainment. There is official data that kind of shows how increasingly pervasive they are in society. More and more people from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life play video games. The industry keeps on growing year on year. So the answer to the question, no, they are not just a technology. Games are culture. And it is precisely in that kind of space, this idea that there is an intersection between gaming and society, this kind of cultural space that games sort of inhabit. And it's in that kind of intersection that this project is sort of positioned. That's the sort of our area of focus as a project. The space where gaming and society meet, and where a lot of important debates and tensions are sort of located about the purpose of video games, about the purpose of generally popular culture, debates around representation, debates around the purpose of technology, debates about the so often problematic relationship that we have with technology. Some people talk about addiction. I'm not generally a big fan of that word, but there's definitely an element of that technology is increasingly so prevalent in our daily lives that the question as to whether we are becoming too dependent on technology or too attached to technology is increasingly being asked in several circles. And often video games are featured in those kind of discussions. So let's say a lot of debates, a lot of tensions, and that's where this project is fundamentally positioned. So in a nutshell, this is kind of more, if you like, philosophically where we are positioned as a project. Let's describe a bit more in detail what the project is about and what we did over the past 14 months. So it's a 14-month project involving 3 partners, the University of Leeds coordinating, the Institute of Educational Technology in Italy also involved, which is part of the Italian National Research Council, and NHTV Breda, which is kindly hosting this event today. So over the past 14 months, we engaged in a number of tasks. Some of these tasks more kind of traditional research tasks, and others more along the lines of stakeholder engagement and consultation, following this idea of expanding, enlarging, involving citizens in defining what the agenda around games should be. So we looked at the state-of-the-art research literature around games, and we looked at the emerging sort of discourse about the artistic and cultural dimension of video games. We looked at how video games are currently being supported at an institutional level, how the European Commission in particular gives money through its various research funding programs, Horizon 2020 in the first place, how the European Commission shapes the agenda through its funding calls, through its strategic sort of documents, and how there are, the fact that there are certain assumptions that seem to underpin these programs. And these assumptions inevitably end up prioritizing certain ways of certain forms, certain priorities of the medium, and sort of sidelining other kind of alternative perspectives. We carried out a relatively large number of in-depth interviews with stakeholders from 4 distinct groups: educators, policymakers, researchers, and players, and obviously developers. We engaged in a series of consultation workshops with an additional group of stakeholders from those groups, which were carried out mainly in Italy and the United Kingdom. We carried out interviews with leading figures from the mainstream development community, the mainstream video game development community. We carried out webinars with industry figures, and we have an advisory board with the key influential individuals from industry and research in Europe. So over the course of today's event, we will discuss some of the key outputs that emerged from the project. There will be a session about a manifesto, which is basically a collection of our main sort of insights and recommendations to policymakers in the first place, but also other stakeholder groups. And we will talk about other sort of the way the different research tasks sort of unfolded, and the challenges that we encountered, and some of the highlights from the kind of the different strands of our project. So before I conclude, I would like to spend a few words about, again, this idea of responsible research and innovation, which kind of underpins the entire project. The idea of responsible research and innovation, the idea that basically people from different communities, citizens, can and should be involved in defining the priorities of technological development, is something that is not an outlandish or sort of pie-in-the-sky concern. It's actually something that goes at the very heart of the European project. If we consider the European project as an initiative built on social responsibility, and this idea of trying to avoid the mistakes of the past. And in the European project, and in particular the idea of Europe as an innovation-driven society, at the core of the idea there is a principle of social inclusion, and there are a number of questions about the purpose of technology, about the kind of interests that technology is supposed to serve. And those kind of concerns are often lost, or they, although they were there in principle, when we look at the way these big technology programs, like for example Horizon 2020 developed, they often get sidelined, and the priority gets shifted to job creation, competitiveness, innovation, unstoppable innovation, which are very important aspects. But there are kind of more kind of social and cultural concerns which are still there, and a project like this is simply trying to bring them back to the surface. We hope we achieve that goal, and we look forward to sharing with you some of our outputs and results today. Thank you.